Welcome to our next Pathways podcast. I'm here with Mr. Adam Herring from Michigan. He's originally from Michigan, but he works at Penn State now. He was recommended to me by one of his previous students. So if you were that student, I want to give you a shout out for giving me a recommendation. Mr. Herring is teaching chemistry at Penn State University. He is a graduate of Brigham Young University, where he got his chemistry education degree, and he also minored in French. Is that correct? Did I find that correct?
Yeah.
Very interesting. I'm definitely going to ask you about that. But he went into college, going into thinking he was going to be a teacher at a high school, like a chemistry teacher, and then he went and pursued further education, and now he teaches at the college level, obviously being at Penn State. And I am here today to interview him and talk to him about his journey into science and how he found himself in just my backyard at Penn State. So welcome, Mr. Herring. How are you doing today?
Thanks. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Perfect. I'm going to start out, and I don't want to forget this because I've forgotten this several times, and I cannot forget this. We're going to start out today with, what is your favorite dinosaur and why?
Oh, when I'm so happy you asked that question because I love dinosaurs as well growing up. It's like, I feel like it was the thing from the 90s, right? It's like just like dinosaurs were all over the place and everyone loved them. And so, okay, short answer is it's the Triceratops. The long answer is because, well, maybe not why, but a story about the Triceratops and me is that I loved it so much that when I was a kid, I would go outside and we had these rose bushes at our house, and I'd go and I'd pick off the thorns from the rose bushes, and I'd get tape, and I'd do the tape where you invert it, and so it tapes to itself, and so I'd stick the tape to my forehead and to my nose, and I'd stick the rose bush thorns to my forehead and to my nose, and crawl around pretending to be a Triceratops. That's how much
that
I
is
love
awesome.
the Triceratops.
Triceratops, I do. You're the second person I think that said Triceratops, and I forgot, I can show you this. I actually have a Triceratops
Nice.
Tattoo. That's one of the main species that we've been able to take out of. So I work in eastern Montana. It's called the Hell Creek Formation. It's right at the end of the Cretaceous period, and there are so many Triceratops. It's funny. At least once a summer, we'll find those huge horns. Kind of like laying on the ground, and they are huge animals, and they are just awesome. So yeah, I can definitely, Triceratops isn't mine, but it's definitely up there. It's definitely up there.
That's very cool.
All right, so I am going to just kind of ask you a little bit about your background. Something I kind of give you a little bit of a introduction here, but let's talk about your early years in high school, because I think that's where a lot of ideas start popping into students' minds of, oh, what do I want to do in the future? What was high school like, and what did you foresee your pathway being after like high school? What did you want to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if I can, let me actually go back a little bit before high school, because I was actually homeschooled up until I started at high school. So my first public education experience was going to high school freshman year with my older brother. And a big reason why we went to school at that point was so he could play sports because he couldn't play on the sports teams unless he was a student. And I was like enamored with my older brother. He was the coolest person. Like I wanted to, like I would match his clothes. I would see that he was wearing something, and so I would wear that thing. And that's cool when you're like in middle school, and by cool I mean acceptable. But when you do it at high school and you both show up like wearing the same thing, people kind of think you're weird, and I was. So, okay. So all of that to say that, to my recollection, in all of my homeschooling, which was great, and I loved that I was homeschooled, and in fact, I homeschool my kids, and I think that that's helpful. I loved having both experiences because I don't think I was exposed to science in any way prior to high school. I have no recollection at all of anything being doing anything science. Our curriculum was what my dad called the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yep. So I remember that saying.
so that's what we did. And it was great. I learned a lot, and I became a very avid learner and loved to learn, and very voracious learner. And so when I was at high school, I was in my freshman biology class, And we ended up doing a field trip at some point during that semester that year to go to visit a Pfizer pharmaceuticals like production plant or something like that. That was about
Mm.
20-25 minutes from my high school. And that was just like the coolest thing to be able to see all these people who were seeking to make society better through science. And as
Mm.
someone who really didn't know much about science, that was just really cool and fascinating. And I thought that, and still to this day, I feel like is the epitome of what science should do, which is make humanity a better place, make the world a better place. And I try and
Yes.
encourage my students to be thinking about that all the time. So that really inspired me and impressed me to kind of just think of science as a possibility for me. Um, and then I was really good at it. So
Yep.
um, aside from the dissections, which I hated, could not do dissections. I mean, I chemistry and physics and math, and I loved it. And I was good at it, and especially chemistry. I mean, that's what I ended up going into. So much so that all of the many of my peers would come up to me, "Oh, Adam, can you help me with this chemistry problem?" And I knew what I was doing, so I was like, "Sure, I'm willing to help you." And so then that kind of also then brought up this idea of teaching. I was like, "Hey, I'm good at science, and people are asking me for help all the time, and it feels good to help them. So let's just explore those two things." And I still remember at one point during I think it was my junior year. So I did college prep chemistry sophomore year, AP chemistry junior year, and I also took physics that same year.
Oh.
And I ended up interviewing my chemistry teacher, who I had for both years, about what it's like to teach chemistry and what would that look like as a career, kind of like envisioning myself in that position at some point down the road. And so I think from the very beginning of being introduced to science, it just felt natural and like a really cool field to get into. And so it was easy to continue in that direction.
I love everything that you're talking about, especially again, we talked before this. My whole goal for these is to lower the barrier for students to enter into science. And I think, some students, especially, if they're coming into middle school, high school, maybe they struggle in science. Maybe it's just like, I never really thought about science as being a pathway. Hearing that like you weren't exposed to science until what, middle school, high school age, and then you just fell in love with it. I love hearing that because that shows students it doesn't have to be that you are the all A student in middle school, in high school. Like you can go into science even if you're still new to it at that level. And I do have to admit, I was probably one of those students that had to ask for your help in chemistry because I definitely struggled in chemistry. And I remember having to ask my friends, especially in college level chemistry, like, hey, I need help. This stuff is over my head. So um, the second thing I want to ask you or talk about, the trip that you did to I think you said the pharmaceutical,
Yeah,
was there anything
Pfizer.
specific? Pfizer, that's right. Was there anything that was specific about that trip that really like opened your eyes or that really was like, oh, that moment was like, really key in just that light bulb moment?
Honestly, I don't recall. The only real details I remember from that trip was we went there. There were people kind of walking all around in their cool lab coats, and it was very apparent that despite the imperfections that each person may have had, and what like just that is it's a business, right? That the goal, that a huge underlying goal was we want to make the world a better place through scientific progress and knowledge and medicine, and to me that ideal that they were striving for really spoke to me.
I love that. That's I forget the saying that I like to use, but it's like you're more worried about the goal than the or not that they say the process. But I had it backwards. Wow, my words are getting jumbled here. You're more worried about the process in this than the actual goal. Is like how do we make humanity better? And that's an awesome kind of goal to stretch for. What was going from those high school classes where you started to really get interested? You were in AP physics. You were in physics, or sorry, AP chemistry. You were in physics. you interviewed your high school chemistry teacher. What did the process look like after that of applying to college? Were you, set on staying locally? Were you set on, any particular college or any particular major? What did that process look like?
That's a great question. So, uh, in addition to what I was doing in terms of scientific development, that kind of thing, I was a theater nerd. Like, I had done some shows actually through my church when I was a kid. I was the goat herd in The Sound of Music. I was young Scrooge in some adaptation of Christmas Carol or whatever. And so when I got to high school, I took drama class and joined the drama club, and didn't do it my first semester, but my second semester started doing shows, and I did every show I could after that. And so I ended up forming a really tight knit, friend family group through the theater program there, and through singing and through the choir. And so while I knew, okay, I want to do chemistry, I kind of applied to places somewhat all over in a sense. I applied to University of Michigan because that was major university, near my home. There's actually one even closer that I applied to as well, Eastern Michigan University. So I applied to those. Michigan Tech had a good chemistry program, so I applied to that. That was up in northern Michigan. And then I applied to a school out in western Michigan because my best friend was going to go there. So I applied there so I could go and be with her potentially. Um, and then I also applied to Brigham Young University in Utah, which is where he ended up going. And that was that school was affiliated with my church, and so I was like, okay, if I go there, then that could potentially make sense. And so I applied to all these things. I got in to EMU. I got into Michigan Tech. I got into Hope College, which is the one in Western Michigan. I got into BYU. I honestly don't recall whether or not I got into U of M. But in the end, I decided, you know what? I want to just kind of leave. I want to experience new things. And so it's like I went as far away as I could, 2,000
Yeah.
miles away, and to just kind of get new experiences. And that's kind of where I ended up there. But I felt like the process of going to these different locations and exploring that, and the process of thinking about like what did I really want from my post high school experience. Did I want to go to Eastern Michigan University where I could literally live at home and save money that way? Did I want to go to the Big Ten school, University of Michigan? Did I want to go off to the western part of the state to go and be able to hang out with my best friend? Did I want to go to the tech school? Did I want to go really far away, right? And there's so many reasons to pick one over the other. And I guess what I would say is there's no one right option for everyone. And I would even say, and this is me, who is a college faculty member teaching chemistry, not even going to college is right for everyone. That there's and even if you're wanting to go into science, that there's plenty of different jobs that one could have, and approaches one could do, and careers one could do, and pathways one could take to end up doing something that is valuable and is enriching and that pays the bills and that checks the boxes for their life circumstances. And I think that I would encourage everyone to be very open-minded about all possibilities, and think about what are their goals, what are their dreams and aspirations, and to not be so narrow about options. 'Cause part of my work as well is as an advisor for students, and sometimes they don't quite meet the requirements to make it to med school, to make it to dental school, to even make it into the chemistry major. And sometimes we have to have hard conversations of, is this really the right path for you? And I don't think that means that they are incapable or unintelligent or don't have potential to do great things. It just means that this may not be the right path for you, even if it's just at this moment. And so a lot of times, I think that it's helpful to think of that and to realize that there's not one path. And I will maybe end it there, but I'll put a little teaser into that kind of, I think I have that perspective in part because of the path. How I ended up where I'm at is a very non-traditional path for ending up teaching at a large educational institution, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense, and I love everything that you said there. I try to we talked a little bit beforehand how like I have to let you talk because I'm like so like, oh my gosh, I love everything you're saying. I want to agree, but it's like I have to let you just like finish that. Yeah, that's 100% agree. That's something I tried to instill in my students when I taught was, a lot of students, especially in science, they're motivated. They have, I have all this planned out. I have, I have to make this, and it's like, no, sometimes you're going to take a left turn, a 90-degree turn, and it's going to be totally different. Doesn't mean you were a failure. Didn't mean that you failed at that. It's just that you realize, hey, maybe my life isn't going to go in that direction. And if it does go in that direction later on, that's great too. We talked a little bit before about me being a paleontologist, or I'm not a paleontologist, but I wanted to be in high school, and I took a left turn because I didn't think it was for me, and now I'm taking a right turn right back into it. So like you said, it's not always sometimes it's about timing. I'm going to go back to something that you were mentioning. So you looked at several colleges, and I love to hear that. Again, I think students need to, when they're looking at college, if they make that decision that that's right for them, is to visit those universities to weigh those options. What was it like for you traveling that far? Were you able to like bring a car? Did you just fly there? What was that transition? Because that can be really daunting for students to travel that far and live in a town that they'd never lived in before, in a state they've never lived in before. What was that like for you, and what did you learn in that experience?
Yeah. So are you asking specifically about Utah or even like west of the state, Michigan? Because that was like 2.5, 3 hour drive too, which can be, that can be far for some people. So
I would say just in general, like what was that? Okay. What was that trend? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. Well, so I guess I will give a caveat that in terms of Utah, so while, yes, that was like 2,000 miles away from where I lived, but I had family who lived there. And I had actually been to the university before for other like summer camps and that kind of a thing. So it wasn't a completely unfamiliar experience. And so to some extent, like that barrier was lowered because I had had prior exposures. And while that won't necessarily be the case for everyone, I do think that, especially nowadays, I'll say post-COVID, quote unquote, a lot of colleges and universities have digital tours, virtual tours and things like that you could go on, even if you can't physically go there, because that can take a lot of time and money and resources, right? That at a minimum to do a virtual tour of some kind, or to do that before you go. That way you have a better feel of what you would really want to see when you do go there in person. That there's a lot of additional resources like that can help to make things more manageable. I would say the last thing you want to do is make a big decision that's going to utilize a lot of resources without investing some small amount of resources first to test out the water and make sure that it's going to be something that's going to be a proper fit for you. That being said, you can always back out, right? Like if it's like, okay, this wasn't right, I'll go back home, and it's not going to be the end of the world, right? A semester somewhere, even a year semester, even 2 years somewhere, if it's in the end not the right place to be, it's not the end of the world. Life's about making mistakes and learning from them. But I think there's wisdom in doing your research, talking to people who are currently there, talking to people who have gone there, and not just the recruiters, right? Because the recruiters, they want you to go there. They're very biased about getting you to go there. And so talk to people who have no financial incentive to have you go there, and see what they think. And I think that's a great way to do the search. I will say as well, like keep notes. right? If you're doing a college search, whether it's going to for undergraduate or graduate, there's a lot that can be going on, a lot of details about costs and travel times and what, different institutions have different systems of, like you could be on a quarter system or a semester system or a trimester system, and like, trying to keep all these details in play. Have a notebook and make some spreadsheets or something where you can keep things organized, and that will really help along the way.
I'm big on writing things down. I love hearing that. I love if any students watching this, I love just, I when I was in high school, I didn't write a lot down because I viewed writing as like a chore. But now it's like I literally keep so many journals and I write so much down. I'm like, oh my gosh, the more I can write down, the better I can self-assess. So I love hearing that. Um, I'm going to jump into, if you're okay, your experiences at Brigham Young University at BYU, chemistry. Chemistry is such a tough major. I knew the friends that I had in college that were chemistry majors. I feel like they were always in lab. They were always studying. Not that I wasn't always studying, but that's such a tough major to get through. And not only that, adding on, I think you got your education certification with that.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
What was that? What was that like at BYU or just in college in general? What was it like being a chemistry major, and what things did you learn? Just what was that experience like of being a science major specifically in chemistry?
Yeah, great question. So it was very humbling, very and rapidly humbling. I was a straight A student in high school, like as I said before, from when I was homeschooled on, I had this thirst for learning, and I was a perfectionist, and could, I never had anything below an A in any of my courses through my whole high school career. First semester of college, same thing, and then second semester, heaven forbid, I got an A minus in a course, and it was a chemistry course that I got an A minus in, and I was like, midlife crisis kind of thing. It's like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Is this even right for me? And then the next year, the next year in the fall, I was doing analytical chemistry, and I got like an A minus or a B plus in it or something as well. And I was just like, is this like, what is going on? Like, I've been a straight A student my whole life, and in chemistry, I can't even get A's. Like, this is what I'm majoring in, right? And of course, and this is coming from someone, just so you're aware, who took the AP chemistry exam and got a 3.
Oh,
Oh, 3 is not good. Three is a pass, but it's like as low as you can get in passing, right?
right.
So, so early on, I learned that a letter grade is an imperfect measure of one's learning and progress and trajectory, and even if it is accurate in describing what you know, that's not where you need to. That's not the end, right? And I tell my students all the time that no one has ever asked me about the A minus or the B plus or the B that I got in my chemistry courses ever. No one has cared. It doesn't matter, because I chose to learn from those mistakes and to do better and to try harder and to not give up and to not let that faze me, right? I think there's a lot of emphasis placed on grades at all age levels, which is not health. A lot of the emphasis that's placed is not healthy. It is good to achieve, and it is good to use that to motivate you. But if you're allowing your grades to beat you over the head with a stick when you didn't get the grade you wanted, whatever that is, then that's not going to be helpful. So I very quickly learned that it was going to be challenging, and it was going to be challenging because it's at this intersection of what we can see and what we can't see. Chemistry happens on the microscopic level or below, which means that we can't see it with our eyes. But the impacts that it has are widespread. They are global. They are personal. And so if you have a hard time with chemistry, it may be because you have a hard time visualizing things that you just can't see. And so it takes some time. But I'm confident that anyone who wanted to learn chemistry well and to be able to speak proficiently using the language of chemistry, they could do so. It just might take longer than someone else because everyone's different. And so if someone out there is interested in studying chemistry, whether as a major or as a minor or just in general, and is struggling, welcome to the club. I'm a chemistry professor and I still struggle. But you can make it because if you have the persistence, then you can do it.
I absolutely love, again, everything that you're saying. As a person who also struggled in specifically just chemistry courses, but all in general science courses in college, when I taught, I taught an AP biology course, as we talked about. Students would, struggle on a test, they might not pass, and I would go to them and say, listen, you're going to have to fail a lot more tests to fail as many tests as I have. I said that's not like I'm bragging, but I said what I've done is, like you said, I've learned from those mistakes, and it's okay to fail. We just have to learn how to get better and learn from those mistakes. Something that just resonated with me while you were talking was comparison is the thief of joy, and I think that's something that I had to learn because I was always comparing myself to my friends who were, in my opinion, much smarter than me in college. And it wasn't until after college where I realized, like, hey, everyone's journey is different and everyone's struggle is different. Just because they're doing well in that doesn't mean they're not struggling in something else. So don't compare yourself to them because you have your own struggles, and everyone just has a different path. And I love hearing the view of grades that you were saying. It's such a fine thing to kind of manage as a professor. And we'll definitely jump into that in a little bit of not stressing your students out, but it's also part of teaching. It's definitely a tough thing to manage. I'm going to jump into your because I loved your answer with navigating through chemistry in college. What as you kind of as you got closer to the end of college, what were your kind of dreams and aspirations? What I know you said I think you taught for at least a year or two at a high school, and then you went back to college. What was that kind of transition from college to post college like?
Yeah, good question. So let me clarify a little bit of what within my undergraduate experience. So at Brigham Young University, they have for most of their education programs or within lots of their programs that do education, like to get teaching certification, it's an integrated program. So I did my degree was chemistry education, which means that I did all of the chemistry stuff up to a certain point, and then I also added on educational procedures, processes, philosophies, practices. I learned how to teach. And part of that included doing student teaching. So my senior year, the last thing that I did was to be a student teacher in a chemistry course. And I was at Westlake High School in Westlake High School? I think it was Westlake High School. Yeah, Westlake High School in Utah. And it started out with me being kind of mentored, just kind of showed the ropes by the high school teacher, one of the chemistry teachers there. And then after, I don't know, probably a month or so of that, 3 weeks of that, it was like, okay, I'm in charge. And so I taught all of the classes and ran the show and everything. And so I did that I think it was close to 3 months or so. It was almost a full semester's, like, for the high school students. And so I did that. And that was my experience kind of teaching at the high school level. In addition to, I ended up doing substitute teaching kind of as a side gig. And so I say that I've taught everything from K through college because I've had some, like, one day, right, as a substitute kindergarten teacher, one day as a second grade teacher, whatever. And very quickly confirmed in my mind that while I love teaching, I cannot teach at those grade levels. That those people have just such a special talent and passion and level of patience with the youngest of the learners that I couldn't do it, and so I had to let them do that. So I had some exposure substitute teaching, up to all ages, through in the high school level. Did my student teaching at high school level, which included ninth grade, like students in ninth through 12th grade. And then I was looking for jobs. And so I graduated from Brigham Young University and was applying to jobs and graduate school because while I knew that I didn't want, like elementary school, I was like, I could maybe do middle school. Like that was fine. Middle school was fine. High school was fine. Like I just didn't know middle school on up. And so I was applying to graduate schools and applying to jobs, kind of just being like, okay, let's just see what works out. And learn from my pitfalls, everyone. As I was applying to graduate schools, I missed deadlines because I didn't keep track of things well enough. Because I had, at that point, 2 kids. I was married, had 2 kids, young kids. And so, and there was, just lots of stuff going on. And so I ended up applying to some graduate schools on time and others didn't. And so I missed the deadlines. And those were the ones I really wanted to go to. And things just worked out to not work out in the sense of I ended up not getting accepted to any of the graduate programs. And that almost all of the jobs that I applied to had no work for me to do. Like nothing. The only job that I ended up getting, like at this time in which I'm thinking, which was like right before graduation. So like March, this time of the year, right? So it's like a couple months coming up to graduation. I got an offer to teach middle school robotics at a charter school in Utah. And I was like, I mean, it's a job, but I don't know that I really want it. And so I ended up turning it down with no other offers on the table at that time, just kind of hoping and praying that something would work out. And things did, but it was still a very scary, treacherous, faith testing path because I ended up I found one job that I actually thought I was going to really like because it was similar to some stuff I did kind of as a side gig in college, meaning I worked in college. I also worked in the chemical stockroom. So behind the scenes, all the people who were helping to prepare the labs and that kind of a thing, I was the student manager for the chemical stockroom. And one of the jobs I applied for was doing that, being the actual manager at Penn State, one of the branch campuses in Du Bois. And so I applied to that, and the job interview process was going really well and all this stuff. And then I found out, like, on or days around my actual graduation date, that they called me and said, we have to start the hiring process all over, re-interview, and you have to reapply and do all the interviews because we had some sort of clerical error. And so I'm like, I'm graduated. I have no solid job prospects. No one is taking me to do graduate programs, and I'm just like, what do I do? It was kind of traumatic, to say the least. Okay, so along the time of applying to this job at Penn State Du Bois, they had part of the process was having me come out for an in-person site visit and interviewing and things. And so I came out, and while I was out here, I ended up applying to everything I could here. When I say here, I mean like in State College, where Penn State University is the main campus is. Because I flew into here, I stayed with my in-laws who live in the area, and so then that was gonna be kind of my home base. And so I applied to every charter school, private school, public school, tutoring service, Penn State main campus, all these different things, because I was desperate. And I was like, hey, I'm here. I'll just go. I'll try. I was raised by, like, my dad always told me, knock on their door and be confident. And they'll, take you in, kind of a thing. Well, so I tried. And all I ended up getting was things like either we're full, we went with someone else, or we could offer you a part-time job for 1 academic year. And so I ended up getting an offer from a local charter school in State College, Pennsylvania, to work 20 hours a week, essentially helping run their after-school program, like being a babysitter for middle school students after school, 20 hours a week. It actually did also come with like, it was like, you can teach these courses as well, what they called they're specials, which was like, so I did robotics and French because I minored in French. And so I was like, okay, well, I could do that for 20 hours. And then I was like, okay, that could kind of work, but that's not going to be enough. And so I followed up with an application at Penn State University at the main campus. I had applied for a position in the chemistry department as like a teaching aide. I don't know. I don't remember the exact title, but I applied for this position and they never got back to me. Not even like the position is full, whatever, like nothing. And so I'm like, well, that's weird for them to not get back to me at all. So I followed up with them and they said, oh, okay, well, this is, here's the person you need to talk to. His name was Joe Kaiser. They're like, you need to talk to Dr. Kaiser. He's the one who hires for this position. So I get his information. I call him up and I'm talking to him, describing what happened and like, hey, I just hadn't heard anything yet. He said, oh, well, I didn't think you were serious. I was like, well, I applied for the position. Why would you not think I'm serious? He's like, I think you misunderstand what this position is. It's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, I saw that you're living out in Utah, and I thought no sane person would move from Utah for this job. This isn't a real job, quote unquote real job. This isn't a career position. This isn't even something that's normally full time. This is like a position where we hire local people who have chemistry experience, chemistry expertise to come and be a teaching assistant in lab courses on a part-time basis, like maybe 10, maybe 20 hours a week. And in my head, I'm like, that's not what your job that's not what the job posting said. Like, this is so weird. He's like, so, and at this point, we're really like, we're so far in the process that even if I wanted to offer you something more, it's like the most I could do is offer you a 20-hour position for an academic year. And so I'm like, he's like, so, you think about it and let me know. By the way, I'm going on vacation in 2 days, so I have to know tomorrow.
Oh my.
And I'm like, okay. So then I sit down and I'm talking to my wife about this. I'm like, well, we have two offers for 2 part-time jobs that we can cobble together. And so in total, that makes a full-time job, right? And because we're both like, naive, inexperienced people are like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Let's do this. So we said, okay. And so we moved literally across the country, 2,500 miles or whatever from Utah to central Pennsylvania, so I could start working at a local charter school and at Penn State in the chemistry department, doing 2 part-time jobs that all I had a guarantee for was essentially the academic year, 2 semesters, and that was it. And they're like, after that, who knows what's going to happen? No benefits, no health insurance, nothing. And thinking back on this, I'm like, would I ever recommend anyone do what I did? Absolutely not. This was nuts. Like, it was crazy to do this, but we were filled with vigor and vim and faith and hope, and figured that something would work out. And so we came here and did those for a year. And after a year, I impressed the folks at Penn State enough that they offered me a position full-time. Now, still temporary, meaning like it's just a year contract, but they said, hey, we'll hire you though full-time to do this instead, and it has benefits. So I was like, oh, goody, yay, I can have health insurance again. And so that's how it kind of started. It was kind of very much a get your foot in the door type of a scenario. Hired fresh out of college with just a bachelor's degree, and really just doing work that someone with all that it needed was someone with a bachelor's degree, because I was hired because they didn't have enough graduate students. graduate students are folks that just have bachelor's degrees. And they said, hey, we don't have enough graduate students. Let's hire some people. So I was hired to do that. And then very sneakily, very subtly over the years, through diligence and persistence and hard work, my responsibilities grew. I was no longer just a teaching assistant, but they had me, like, for these specific courses, they expanded with courses I was involved in. And then it expanded to, well, you could help us run the training session. Like, you have a background in teaching. They're like, oh, you have a background in teaching. You could help us run the training sessions for the graduate students because you know about how to teach and how to think about teaching and all this stuff. I was like, yeah, I do. And so, like, you could train the people to teach. And then it became, well, here, teach this course on teaching to our undergraduate students. And so, like, every year, it's like about every year, they, like, things changed just a little bit more, and I was getting embedded a little bit more, and I was still just, like, the position was the same. My title was assistant. That was my title. Mm-hmm. I was assistant. Not the assistant to anything. I was just assistant. That was the official title. And it wasn't, so I started that was in 2015, and it wasn't until 2022 that I was actually hired on as a faculty member. And the path was, I'm working hard and showing that I can be relied upon and doing these things. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, no one wanted to teach the summer course for the lecture, the general chemistry lecture course. This is your first semester chemistry course. It was taught in the summer. And they said, no one wants to teach this course because it's going to be remote, asynchronous, all this stuff. And they said, hey, Adam Herring, do you want to teach this course? And I said, sure. And so then that was my first experience teaching for real, meaning, like, I was the person in charge. I could do things how I wanted. And then, with the exception of one semester, the first semester after that, I was put back on as just like a regular TA in terms of my assignment. But they still, even then, I was still responsible for more things. They're like, here, we're going to put you on the exam writing committee, and you're going to help the exam writers make sure that they are actually aligning the questions to the learning objectives and things like that. With the exception of that one semester, ever since then, they had me back teaching as though I was a faculty member. And at that point, I still only had a bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So for those who don't know much about what it's like in colleges and universities, there is a lot of politicking. There's a lot of prestige associated with so-and-so is doctor of X. They've done research in Y. And so me being someone who didn't have a PhD or a doctorate degree in something is very uncommon, very, very uncommon to be at a university at all on the academic side, on teaching things. Like, most of the staff don't, right? So if you're staff working in finances or whatnot, you're not going to have a PhD. But if you're teaching, you've got a PhD almost everywhere. That and that is a staple of being at a college or university. And so the fact that they had me teaching their introductory chemistry course to hundreds of students with a bachelor's degree was like unheard of. Now, I was working on a master's degree at the time. I actually started it. It might have been the year I was hired full time, because I was like, ooh, I get a nice juicy 75% discount on tuition, so I'm going to take advantage of that. So I started a master's degree in education, and so I was working on that, but I was doing that only part time. Like, master's degrees, for those who are less familiar, you typically get done within 2 years if you're doing it full time. Well, so I started in like 2016, and I didn't graduate until December of 2020. So it took me twice as long to do it because I was working full time, because I had a family, and so I was just doing that part time. But I eventually graduated with my master's degree. But even then, that's just a master's degree. And so here I am, I got hired on in 2022 as a faculty member, which meant that I could be promoted, which meant that I had a real title, not just assistant. And right now I'm still in that position, meaning like I'm in the faculty, I have a master's degree, and almost everyone else in the department. There's actually one other person in the chemistry department who's in a position similar to mine, where she kind of non-traditional path to get to Penn State and teaching there, and she doesn't have a PhD either. So there's two of us total, but across the university, it's very uncommon, and so it's been very interesting because on the one hand, I definitely have this sense of uh, feeling like
Imposter
I'm a fake.
syndrome.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Because I'm like, I don't even have a PhD. What am I doing here? And then on the other hand, I was nominated for and almost won the department's teaching award this year. So like I was that close to being labeled the best teacher in the department. And so I'm like, so I'm like, it's just letters. It's letters is what it is. And now to let me be clear that can be very important letters depending on what you're wanting to do. But because I feel like my experience, I mean, I was from a very young age, I knew that I wanted to teach and had that as my kind of driving vision. And I trained to teach. I'm like, that's what I'm doing. I'm not doing research and chemical research. If I was, then yes, I would be an imposter. But I'm not. I'm teaching, and so I feel like I'm able to do it well because I have prepared for that, and because of the mindset in which I approach it. So I love what I do, and honestly, even though I don't have a PhD, and sometimes I feel like I'm an imposter, I feel like most of the people around me, even though they know that I don't have a PhD, they don't really care. And so I think that it says a lot about, A, the culture of the chemistry department at Penn State, how inclusive and welcoming it is, just based on what you can do and not, not looking at your name or anything like that. But also that you can take different paths. The pathway to get to a destination isn't always the same for everyone, and I'm sure my pathway was a lot harder in some ways, but it's been very fulfilling.
I love there are three main. I love everything about what you were saying. There are three main things I definitely want to touch upon. So the first thing, well, congratulations. That's a tough journey, especially like you said, jumping from Michigan to Utah, then Utah to Pennsylvania. I mean, you said you had, I think, extended family here, but that's still a big jump. So, kudos to you for taking that dive. But a couple other things. I love when you talk about you took that position early on where you were working kind of like half time in two different locations. Something I think students can maybe get frustrated by is, when they do graduate, they want, I want to be in this position, but sometimes they have to take these like jobs. They're, it's somewhat in their field, but it's not perfect. And I think they feel like, oh, I failed because I didn't get there. It's like, no, that's just one of your stepping stones. And I'm sure you can attest that you learned probably a ton from those two things, and that led you into where you're at today. Mm-hmm. I first started teaching, I only had one bio class. The other classes were teaching chemistry and physics, and I was way out of my league, but it led into other things. So I think that's important for students to hear is it doesn't have to be perfect right off the bat, and there's so much you can gain by taking a job that you may not want to, I would say want to, but might not be your first choice.
Absolutely.
There's two. I forget to write these things down. I want to write these things down because I get going. I'm like, oh, I forget the other things. I do want to commend Penn State and the chemistry department, because I know in certain, and I don't want to throw any particular college group in, but in some departments it can be very, I don't want to say hierarchical, but just a lot of enemy judgment. It's just nice to hear that there's a department that doesn't look at that, and they take who you are as a person and what they know you can do more than just like you said, the letters that come by your name. I think that's a thing that students need to hear is one way that you can set yourself apart is by hard work. I am a total big believer in that. Is you can be the smartest person in the room, but if you're not willing to work hard, I'd rather much work with a student or a person that's hardworking and might not know everything they need to know, but I can you can train them. So that's really cool to hear. What's it like being a chemistry professor or a science teacher in chemistry or in science now? Like what has that experience been like?
So I can only speak about my experiences, right? Because I know there's a lot of different experiences out there, and I have friends who teach at Penn State in different departments, and I have friends who teach at other institutions, chemistry and otherwise, and everywhere is going to be a little bit different. But for me, I can say that it has honestly been a real blessing to be working here at Penn State in the chemistry department, doing what I'm doing. There's so much flexibility. Like, I have so much freedom in what, where, when I do things, and it allows me to take care of my family. It allows me to take care of me. It allows me to take care of my students, and I don't have to worry about meeting a specific 9 to 5 kind of a thing. And so for me personally, that's honestly really helpful. It's also great because while we have specific learning goals, there's certain mandated things that we're supposed to, students will be able to do this, that, and the other kind of a thing that have been established for us. We have a lot of freedom and flexibility in how we meet those goals. So, for example, my classes are all flipped, meaning instead of students coming to class 3 times a week for lecture, and I blab at them for 50 minutes, and they take notes, and they go back and do their homework. I've pre-recorded all my lecture videos, which, if anyone wants, maybe I don't know, maybe you could put a link to in this. My videos are all available on YouTube for anyone to watch. There's no, it's just publicly available, free for anyone to use. I think there's still a couple I need to get put up, but they're almost all there. Students watch the videos ahead of time. They do some pre-class activities to see if they understood the material or to what extent they understood the material. And then when they come to class, I do a very short overview of the material, do some demonstrations so they can see how that conceptually gets put into practice, either with solving problems or more fun, actually doing chemical demonstrations, which is a lot of fun. And then they get the time to work on what would have been their homework in groups. We have the room set up so that way I and the rest of the teaching team can get to everyone. So if anyone ever has a question, we can always get to them and always help them answer their question. And then most semesters I've been very fortunate as well that I'm able to keep the room that we're in reserved for the hour after class. And so anyone who wants to stay and get help after class is able to stay after and get more help on the material. And so that flexibility of teaching flipped or backwards or whatever is smiled upon. They're like, great, you want to try something a different way? Do it. And the students overwhelmingly love it. Not everyone, but I think that they just haven't given it a chance yet when they say they don't. But like every semester, 90% or so of the students say they love it that way, wish that they had more classes that way. So the department is very welcoming of different strategies, different approaches, and I think that is a very good thing to have. And I know that that can't always be the case in every chemistry department and every university, just depending on the needs and the courses and things like that. But that's something I'm very fortunate to have and very glad to have.
I've always been I love, again, we talked about this before, providing resources for students outside of class. I think that's something that's big for teachers nowadays, especially after post-COVID. But I've always would love to have had that kind of flip style classroom in high school. I just never, it's so tough because in high school, I think you would agree with me, there are so many more dynamics that are going on. Students, I feel like, are just involved in so many things where they just would maybe not have the time. I love hearing that you're implementing it in college and you're having major success with that. I'm a big, like you said, I don't like just standing up in front of a lecture. I don't think I've ever, when I was a teacher at a high school, I don't think I ever lectured for a whole period because I just think that's just almost like a crime, because it's just after a first half hour of me just sitting in something, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to do something else. And I love hearing that you're, again, more, what's the word I'm looking for? You're more interactive with your students when they're in class. And I was going to ask what your students, what their overall view was, but you were saying how positive it is. What type of, let me ask you this. Do you have an attendance policy? And if so, what type of attendance do you see with that, with your students?
That's a great question. So, um, the students get points for coming and attending and participating in class, but it's a very flexible policy, and I think that that's very important. These students are adults, and they have real lives, and sometimes they're sick, and sometimes there's family things, or religious observation, or extracurricular activities, and they have to make a decision, or sometimes a decision is made for them by external circumstances that says you're not going to be in class. And honestly, that's why I love that my videos and things are available to them, because if they miss, they can still stay caught up on the material. They don't have to worry about getting the notes from another person. So that's something that I love about that. However, I do think that there's much value to be gained by coming to class, and that's why I encourage them via points. And a lot of students at the college level love their points. And even though, if they really were to think about it and say, do I need these points in order to even honestly earn an A? The answer is no. Like you could get an A in the course and not have any of the attendance points, and you'd still be fine. But despite that, students come to class. It's not everyone. This semester, it's like, let's see, I have 180-ish students enrolled, and there's about 150. Yeah, I know, it's a lot. It's in one course. It's a big lecture room, 350 seats. So half the seats are enrolled in, and then about 150, 140 of them show up on a given day. And frequently, the ones that don't, it's kind of an alternating basis of who's there and who's not, right? So it's not like the same 40 people are missing every day, but there are some who do, like the chronic absenteeism. I think it's important to engage as much as one can if you want to learn a lot, and so I incentivize them to come participate, and for the most part they do, and even when they don't, I actually am appreciative. I would much rather have a student not come to class because they're choosing to do something else that they value than to come to class and just sit and be a bump on a log and take, like, because then when we check in with you and you're like, no, I don't want to talk to you at all. I'm like, well, why are you here? Find something better to do. You don't have to be here, right? And so I actually tell them, like, hey, if you got something better to do, honestly, like legitimately something better to do, go do that other thing. Right? This is meant to be valuable, and if it's not, then be an adult and choose something else. So I value that as well, right? Empowering people to make choices that make sense for them, and not focusing on, I need to get all of the points in the course. That's not what's important.
I love that. Something my dad always taught me was, life's full of decisions, and like you said, college isn't for everyone, and if if you really want to be there, be there, make the decision. But like you said, if you do have other things that you're deciding, hey, I want to do this instead, that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just making sure that you're okay with those decisions. I love hearing that. And it's something, as a teacher, I taught for 12 years, and I feel, especially in my early years, how to say this correctly, I didn't understand how much importance there was on students' attendance. And I think that's such a big key in their learning. I'd rather just have a student in my classroom, and especially towards the end of my career, I would get so mad when students were being pulled out of my classroom for X, Y, and Z reasons. I'm like, no, they are here. The bulk of the learning goes on when they are here. And if they're not here, even for 5 minutes, it's the 5 minutes they leave. It's the 5 minutes they have to like get caught up. It's the 5 minutes of being confused. There's so much importance of being in class that just is. I'm hearing from you, and it's really nice to hear. I'm gonna jump into and I'm sure if any of your students are watching this, they might they might be like, oh, I've heard this before. If you were to give advice to a college student, specifically that is in a chemistry class or is in a chemistry major, about college, what piece of advice would that be?
Mm, it's a great question. I
I threw you
so
for a curveball there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, okay, so I'm gonna not think about this and just go based on what I've been trained to do, which is when it comes to effective design of course, you have to start with the goal. You have to start with what you want people to learn. Okay. And I think that this applies outside of just, I'm trying to design, make a new course or make my course better. It applies to life. That if you don't have specific goals in mind, it's like the Cheshire Cat. Alice comes up to me like, which way do I go? And well, where do you want to go? I don't know. Well, then it doesn't matter which path you take, right? So if you don't know, at least have some idea of what your goals are, then you can spend a lot of time floundering. For example, when I was doing my master's degree, I was doing it in science education, and I mean, no, okay, so, and that made sense because I loved education, I love science, right? And this would further my understanding, and I would get to learn more about educational policy, structure of higher education, developing curriculums, all these different kinds of things. But I didn't really know what I wanted like to do with that. I knew I wanted to do it because I wanted to get a higher degree, but I didn't know where I was wanting to go with it. So much that every course I took, I loved it so much that I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this. Like, I'm going to be a curriculum developer. Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to learn about learning, like research learning theories and how does learning work, that kind of thing. Or, oh, I want to do this. I'm going to do academic advising. It's like every course I took, because I was taking one at a time, I was just hyper focused on that. I was like, that's what I'll do. That's what I'll do. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do because I love all these things. And so I spoke to my boss, who was the guy, Joe Kaiser, the guy that hired me initially. And I was like, Joe, what do I do here? And he's like, if you don't pick something, then you'll just waste time doing nothing and everything. And he's like, take some time to think about what it is of these things that you're really enjoying. What is it that really intrigues you? Because I'm sure you could do a lot of different things, but can you do all of those things at the level at which you want to do them at, right? Can you actually be the expert in all of these 5 different, subfields of education? Probably not. Pick one. And he's like, it doesn't really matter which one you pick. But if you pick one and then you have a direction, then you'll be able to be more productive. And I was like, okay. So then I sat down and kind of thought about it. I was like, well, what do I love most about the different aspects of my job or the different aspects of these courses? And decided, you know what? I actually don't think I love teaching chemistry, as odd as that sounds. I was like, it's not teaching chemistry that I love. It's teaching people who are having a hard time with chemistry. Okay? And that's a very subtle difference. And I was like, a lot of that can be kind of addressed in some ways, like with academic advising. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to pick academic advising as like the thing I'm going to do, quote unquote. It's like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be an academic advisor. I'm going to like shift from teaching chemistry to being an academic advisor. And because though I didn't want to like give up teaching chemistry, I actually came up with a proposal and sent it to the department head. And I was like, hey, this is why instead of just having faculty who do academic advising, this is why we need to have a professional, dedicated academic advisor, why it will be better for the students, why it will be better for the faculty, for the department as a whole. And I wrote this all up and I sent it to them. And then COVID hit. And, everything got delayed and blew up and all this stuff. And in the end, I didn't become an academic advisor, even when I applied for positions actually as academic advisors. And even when there were more that were opening up, I was like, I don't know that that's really what I wanted to do or what I should be doing. But the fact of having made that decision of here's my current goal made me much more productive and help me focus. And I think that even if in the end, where you end up going, what you end up doing is different from what goal you set out to be or do. Setting that goal and striving for that is going to help you achieve more than what you would have otherwise.
I love that. I have yeah, I absolutely love that. My one of the things I do for just kind of recording what I do on a daily basis with my content is I have this like, sheet of like, oh, this is what I do every day. And at the top I have I wrote out my goal statement pretty much when I started this journey into content creation. And every once in a while, I'll just go back and reread it and be like, okay, what's the goal here? What am I focusing on? I just like the view of how to progress. And like you said, sometimes those goals will change. Yeah, absolutely love that. I'm going to jump in. I have a couple more questions because we're getting a little bit past an hour, and I don't want to take too much more of your time. One of the questions I do want to ask you, as a college professor, you're probably going to smile and maybe roll your eyes and maybe just grumble. What has AI done to college life as a professor / student? How do you see it progressing in the future? Just tell me about AI and what your experiences have been with it so far.
Okay, so that's a great question. I feel like I both have this immense frustration with AI, but also a very narrow understanding of it both at the same time. Meaning, I've used it and I've used it to try and improve efficiency on some projects and things, and it flopped. Okay, like it gave me summaries of data sets that I knew were false. I'm like, I know this is a lie. Like, and I couldn't figure out how to make it work. And I'm like, okay, this isn't working. Um, but I've also seen in other cases where it's done a lot, it's done some great things. And so I'm like, I have this love-hate relationship with it in terms of using it myself. And I think part of it is because there's so many different options, right? You've got, and they're not all the same. And because I don't fully understand any one of them, it's like, it's just this frustrating mess, right? So my experience with it has mostly been frustration from personal experience using it. I will say, and hearing secondhand from my students, some of them report actually using it in ways that I think could be very helpful. Like, I give my students the list of the learning objectives for the unit. I say that on the midterm, which you can ask any of my students, I don't call exams. I call celebrations of knowledge. Okay, there's a backstory for
Oh,
that.
I love
but
that.
We can dive into that later if needed. But for these celebrations of knowledge, I tell them, I'm like, look, I'm going to be very transparent with you. This is an introductory course, and while it is challenging, I'm going to be clear about what I expect you to know and be able to do. So here's the list of things, and this is what I want you to do. But I'm not going to deviate from that. Like, I'm not going to, if you do poorly, I'm not going to curve it. I'm not going to curve it. No, I told you what to expect, right? So anyways, so what they've been telling me that they do is they'll take that list and they'll go to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever and say, hey, generate me a list of questions from these learning objectives to assess. And I'm like, okay, that sounds like that could be a very useful thing. And it seems like it. I think, though, where students are misusing it potentially is that they use that then to like rob themselves from an experience with another human being where they actually get to interact and maybe teach another person, right? Explain it to another person. And in the end, they don't know things as deeply. And my evidence for this is a couple things. I teach a course that's online, and I teach it in the fall. It's all online. And 2 years ago, we still had ChatGPT and all this stuff, but it was still relatively new. People weren't using it as abundantly. Well, this last year, I think everyone was using it. And I think that because, in the past, they would come to office hours. So even though we didn't meet in person, we'd have office hours where they could come in and get help. And it wasn't a ton of people, but we'd usually get 20%, 30% of the students would show up at some point, once a week, something like that. This last semester, it dropped from like 20 people showing up over the course of a week, at over 20 different time periods, to like 20 total visits from students over a 15-week semester.
Ugh.
It
That's rough.
tanked hugely, and it's not as if people were doing significantly better or worse. They just weren't. They would tell me this, like, oh, well, I figured instead of logging onto Zoom and doing all my credentials and having to explain, I could just ask ChatGPT and it would then explain to me. And I'm like, okay, that works if it's telling you the truth. But I know from my personal experience that it can hallucinate, that it can tell you things very confidently that are wrong. And if you can't tell the difference, you're going to get fooled. And this notion of discerning truth from untruth is actually one that I try to instill. Even before generative AI was as widespread as it is now, I try to work with them on it. I'd say, look, people are going to lie to you. They're going to lie to you on purpose or accidentally, but you need to be able to tell the truth. And I think the most common example of this that any chemistry teacher of any, location, age, range, whatever will tell you is about DHMO. Now, do you know about DHMO?
No, I don't think so.
Wait. So
dihydrogen monoxide?
Yeah, you know about dihydrogen
Yeah.
monoxide.
Yeah.
Like you can get a tiny, like the smallest amount of dihydrogen monoxide, DHMO, into your lungs, you'll be sick for days. It causes billions, with a B, billions of dollars of damage across the entire planet every year. It's found in almost every poison. Okay. It is a major cause of climate change. Yet, not only is it allowed in all of our foods, it's found in like rat poison. It's found in it's found in drugs, and the FDA, the government, your local government promotes you consuming it on a daily basis, and it comes out of your tap. You can get it from your tap actually. You just turn on your faucet and it will come out with the water at a concentration unheard of for almost any other thing, at 55 molar concentration. That is absurdly concentrated, right? It's just all over the place and it can cause so much damage. And so I do this on the first day, and there was one semester, no joke, that the student stood up and was like, I'm going to petition the university president right now that we need to ban DHMO from campus. This is crazy. I was like, you go right now and you tell him. Yeah. Right. And I use that to illustrate that things can sound very true and very convincing, and everything I said there is truth, but it was said in a way to intentionally mislead. And if you don't know the truth, if you can't find out what the actual truth is, then you're going to get misled. So in the end, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or your neighbor or your mom or your dad or news or politicians or whomever, you need to be able to evaluate what they say, look at what the evidence says, and make sure that they align.
I love, so first of all, I love that story, the DHMO. I would try to, I forgot that it was abbreviated to that. Once in a while that would be brought up in my classroom. I'm just like, oh, I love that term. One thing I want to go back to and just really highlight what you said there, because I loved what you said. You said, the students might be using ChatGPT, and like you said, you have to figure out whether it's telling the truth or not. But there is something that they're missing when they do it with a computer, with an AI system, rather than doing it with a person and learning together and teaching each other. There is such a soft skill that I think students miss with that. And I'm very glad that I see a lot of schools now going from, oh, we want all this tech, and now it's, no, we're actually going to ban this tech because we want our students to work together and to interact. And that's something that I'm seeing more and more. And I'm trying not to feel like this old person that's like, oh, this next generation. But it's definitely something I've seen a change in with the the younger individuals, when I go to different science aspects, things, I don't want to say any specific groups, but it's the students are not as, they're on their phones the whole time. They're not interacting. And I'm like, guys, like, you have to interact. Like, this is part of science. Like, I'm sure as you know, and you can attest, there's so much communication. There's so much working together. There's so much that's just people, that I think AI is. It terrifies me. It absolutely just terrifies me.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to butcher this, but this is like, at least third or fourth hand at this point, but I heard someone relay the sentiment recently, like, well, so if you're using AI to do this, if AI can do this thing, then who's going to hire you to do this thing? And it's a tool, and every tool can be used properly or improperly. And there's a time and a place for every tool to be used. And so I think that the, I guess, defining challenge of this, generation of students, whether it's, the youngest to those in college right now, is how do we use it effectively to do the broader goals of science in general to better humanity in the world, right? Rather than to destroy and to take away from the good that we can do.
Love that. I'm going to ask you two more questions if that's okay.
Okay, go for it.
The first question is a tough one. So the reason why I'll just, before I even ask the question, I'll give you the reasoning why I asked this question. Just being, seeing science through my eyes is different for, than another person might see science through their eyes. And I think especially early on, I didn't realize that science looked different for every person, and their experiences may be different than what I experienced. And that's something my views dramatically increased in college when I got to see those in action. So again, I'm just trying to, the goal of this is I want to not only teach myself, but any other student that might need just to hear, hey, everyone has a different path and everyone sees things differently. It's important for us to recognize that. So with that being said, the question, what is something that I could learn about science walking through your shoes? Obviously you have a different path. You went to BYU, and you had that path there. We talked a lot about that, your science path, but what is something maybe that you would think that your journey taught you that maybe other people might not realize about science?
Yeah. Science is, for me, it's not a subject matter. I think we think of like, oh, I studied, what science class are you going to take, right? Or like, did you study science in college or whatever? And we think of it as a subject matter, but it's not that only. It's a way of thinking about life in the world. Its roots come from the word knowledge, right? To know. And so science is about knowing the truth. And I think that in the end, to me, that's what's most important. Whether it's truth about what are typically viewed as scientific topics, chemistry, physics, biology, or whether it's the truth about what happened the other day down the street, like what did my 12-year-old say to the 8-year-old that threw him off his rocker and made him sock him in the jaw, kind of a thing, right? Science is about knowing the truth, and experience is a way to inform that, right? But it's also just our perspective, and I think that I said that earlier, right? When you asked about, it's like, well, tell me about what it's like to teach college chemistry, kind of thing. Like, well, I can tell you from my perspective, and I think that that's an important aspect of science, meaning to know as well, which is everyone's an individual and everyone is informed by what they have lived, and what they have experienced, and that's imperfect. Like, no one has a complete data set to be able to understand everything. And so even when they make a claim about something, right, it's based on what they know. And I think I usually like to live my life in a way where I assume that when people are telling me something, that if I'm actually interacting with them, that they're trying to tell me the truth based on what they know, right? That they're not trying to hoodwink me. There've been times, and there still are times when I'm like very skeptical about others, and I just got out of saying, right, you need to be you need to be able to tell truth from fiction, right? But I think it's a lot harder to lie to a person when you're talking to them face to face, right? It's a lot harder to do that because, as you pointed out, there's this human element to things, right? That human interaction draws out, I think, the natural good in people, even if their intention initially was to defraud you and to tell you a lie and to manipulate you or whatever, right? I think by having an actual human interaction with people, that we can be better. And to me, science is about that.
I hate to just keep on saying I love what you're saying, I love what you're saying, but I love what you're saying. There are times when I'm listening to this, I'm like, ooh, I want to make that a TikTok. So I'm like, ooh, I think that's going to be a TikTok because you spoke so well there, loved it. The last question I'm going to ask, this is I like to end on this if I can, just because I think it's a good segue into the future. We talked about your past, we talked about your current, and now we're talking about your future. With you primarily focusing with your career on teaching, and not maybe the research, which is, I'd love to even just dive down that's even further. But what is something that you're still interested in? I want to say learning about, but you're still interested in maybe trying out. Is there a different type of lesson? Is there a different class that you're like, ooh, I would love to jump into that sometime? Or is there research that you would like to conduct sometime in the future, when you have maybe more time? What's something you're still interested in learning about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually am doing some research right now. I'll call it educational research. It's not like wet lab research, right? Mixing chemicals, that kind of a thing. But I'm working, it's kind of this cross disciplinary study. A couple folks in chemistry and a couple folks in the information sciences and technology department. And what we've done is created effectively some very basic video game quizzes in order to help students be more interested in learning chemistry concepts. And it's very rudimentary. Like, by no means is this anywhere close to like an actual, what I would consider to be fun video game, but it's the roots of it. And it gets at this idea that learning can be interesting and fun and should be. And so that's one aspect of it. But and to that point, I have always like, I never took a class on economics. And without making things political or whatnot, like, I used to like listen to the news a lot, and I don't listen to it as much anymore because sometimes it just like makes me so depressed to see how what's going on in the world, and just like how much tragedy that there is that's going on. And so sometimes I just need to shut that out. But I would love to understand more fundamentally, like, how does the economy work on small scale, big scale? Like, I've always been interested in that. And honestly, one of the reasons why I wanted to teach at a college university was so that way I could continue to like just sit in on people's classes and just learn about subjects. Like, that has been like my dream for years and years, was to just like, I just want to go. And so at some point when I make the time for it, it's like, I'm going to go sit in on so-and-so's econ class because I know him and I know he is a fantastic teacher and does a great job. So I will pick up some cool teaching techniques and some strategies and some in-class things, some just ideas to improve my teaching. But then I also get to learn about econ, which I've always wanted to do. And so to me, like, I want to just continue to learn. And so that's one topic in general, but I know there's more. Like, I'm sitting on a class right now about industrial safety, which ties into what I'm doing because I teach lab courses, right? And so there's a lot of things that relate to lab safety. And it actually, something we talked about in one class period, I was like, huh. And so I followed up on that, thought that popped in my head, and some good has come from that in terms of how I'm running my lab class right now. So I think that regardless of where people are at, they have opportunities to learn more. Whether like I have the benefit of being at a very excellent research institution where I could pop in pretty much on anyone's class and get away with sitting in and learning about a topic if I wanted to. And people come and lecture all the time on special topics. But you could be a mechanic at a car shop and learn something new, whether it's related to your field or not. And I think that the attitude of we can always learn more, that, this notion of lifetime learning is not only, it's not just this catchphrase that you might hear about, but it should be a real approach to our lives, and that the world will be a better place if everyone were to sincerely and genuinely just try to learn a little bit more. Because I feel like the more you learn about another culture, the more you tend to appreciate it and value it and recognize that it has good in it, even if it's not yours. And even if you were taught to not like that particular way of thinking or particular thing, it's like the more you learn, I think the more peaceful we will all be, and the better the world will be, because we can see the value in the good that others have and that others can bring, and we'll see the good in them, and we will give them grace for their areas of weakness.
I love it. And I was just thinking, I totally understand why our student that we share recommended me to you, because everything that you've said in our podcast has been very true. And I just want to again thank you for taking your time and just talking to me. There were several points throughout this podcast, I will admit, I forgot I was on a podcast. I'm like, oh my gosh, it just felt like just a wonderful conversation. So thank you so much for just taking the time out of your busy schedule and better educating me, but also any student that's watching this. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure. Honestly, I didn't know beforehand really what I was getting into. I think intentionally did not listen to any of your stuff just because I kind of wanted to just experience it for myself, not come in with any preconceived notions. And this has been a great experience for me as well. So I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much.